due to your work, due to what you created at Fratello, you've been able to create a limited edition with one of the big names
Yeah.
in the industry, which is Omega.
And then last but not least, I think, my first one, the Caliber 321. We like to pinpoint those things, but that does not have to be valid for everyone.
Which one would you say that it was maybe the best experience you've been able to live due to Fratello? Let's speak about Fratello.
Yes.
And can you explain us what we can find there and what is your approach to watchmaking?
So basically what you can find on Fratello is, I would say, curated content about what but also perhaps more importantly, what a team loves about watches. So we really look at watch brands that have something interesting, be it story-wise, be it product-wise. So really try to educate, but also to entertain people about watches. So we don't want to be... So we are not journalists. I don't consider ourselves journalists, but we just write about watches. And I think that's a different approach. We do use some journalistic integrity rules. So we ask brands for input. If a statement is made, we try to double check it and so on. But in the end, we just write about watches, about the things we are passionate about, basically. And that can differ from writer to writer. So as you may know, I collect Speedmaster watches, so I'm very focused on those watches. I also have a soft spot for Breguet. I have a soft spot for some vintage Rolex. So I like to cover those parts. But there are also some colleagues who are totally in love with other sorts of brands, other price brackets that they like to look into. We have a few guys that are really into diving watches, so they focus on those type of watches. We have guys that are really into independence. So that's why I think we can bring a nice mix of content that ensures that there's something for everyone out there, basically.
Yeah. And also, I would personally add that you really say what you think about the watch that you are speaking about.
That's our personal take on the watch, and if we don't like a certain element of the watch, we will say so, because only then it makes sense, because not everyone can be nice and lovely. So we like to pinpoint those things, but that does not have to be valid for everyone. You know, the fact that we don't like a certain element about the watch doesn't mean it's a bad watch or not the watch for you. I think our audience is clever enough to come up with his or her own opinion after reading our articles.
You practice a skill, which is like writing articles, which is not really easy to do. Mm-hmm. Could you please explain us what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, so that's a tough one, because I think all the writers have their own style. The good thing is that everyone has their own style of writing, and some will write better than the others. But in the end, we have a control in place, which is a copy editor that makes sure that it's all in the same kind of style visually, but also the text of the article should be more or less in the same kind of style. So it all needs to be correct, of course, in the same. I think we use American English, for example. So those things are like technical measurements we have in place to make it professional. But then it really depends on the writer, and I think it depends on how you feel about watches and what your association is with a certain watch, or that you have an association between a watch and another thing, like movies or actors or cars or whatever. So I think it's all about these connections you can make with watches, how a watch makes you feel, basically, because everyone can write down or list the specifications of a watch. I don't think there's any skill in that. I think the skill is in transforming the feelings and emotions you have about a certain watch onto paper, or in this case, onto your screen. And I think that's a very a difficult thing to explain, because it differs per person, but it's also something. It's practice.
Yeah.
So
Do you remember the first time you wrote an article, the first one ever? You say, okay,
No, I think it's a long time. Already in the 90s. So I am not a writer by trade. I'm not a journalist by trade. I have a completely different background. So professionally, in the end, I wrote reports. I was working at an investment bank, and I wrote like reports. So my writing was quite technical, I would say.
Yeah, straight
Um,
to the point, we would
yeah,
say.
straight to the point, and not anything poetic. We have writers on the team that have a journalistic background, and they are much better at writing as such. So they really can write about anything basically if they want. That's definitely a skill. But I think it makes it so much easier if you love a certain product. I could not write about, I don't know, a tennis racket. For
Mm.
me, that's just I know what's I know what it is, and I know that there are different ones and so on, but I'm not interested in it. So for me, it's very difficult to write about a tennis racket. But I think if there's a product or an item that you really love, I think it's much easier to express yourself in a very nice way, or yeah, in a good way. So others will also enjoy reading your article, basically.
On average, how long does it take to create an article at Fratello?
Process is, for example, here in the office, we get watches in from brands, they ship it to us, and then I think let me take myself as an example. I pick up the watch, and I study it, I wear it, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week, sometimes even longer. So you get a good understanding about the watch, how it makes you feel, the pros and cons of the watch while wearing, things you might like at first, but that you start to dislike later on,
Mm.
or the other way around. Sometimes I don't have a connection with the watch when I just unboxed it and I put it on the wrist, and as time goes by, I think, oh, it's actually nicer than I thought it would be. So those kind of impressions, I think, are very useful and good to have before you start writing. And I think it's only then that the author starts the writing part, and sometimes you need to check with the brand for some questions, some follow-up questions. Why they did this, or why they did that, do that. Some technical questions, perhaps. And at the same time, the watch goes to the studio to have pictures made, and often already before I start to wear it, because then it's still fresh and new and no fingerprints and so on. And once our photographer is done, then I'll take the watch to wear it and have a look at it. Sometimes we put it on the timing device to see how it runs and so on.
Mm.
Um, but very often the watches are prepared for us, so the brands make sure that they run well. um, so
So
yeah,
from A
that's
to
how it works.
Z,
Yeah, so
it
it's a, it's
takes.
a full, it's a full process. So it can take up to a month if you include the wearing time, the pictures, and so on. But if you are in a hurry and you really need to do the job fast, I think you can do it in 1-2 hours if the photographer is also doing that at the same time. So
Mm.
if we write, for example, on the spot during Watches and Wonders, um, we get the information, we see the watch, the photographer takes the pictures, and we have to be very quick and agile. And you don't get a long thought piece there. You just get a hot take or introduction article. Yeah, that can be done within an hour, for example.
Yeah.
But if you want to properly do a hands-on review, and I think that's what most people enjoy to read, and that's also what I enjoy most to write, basically. I think that can be from a day to a few weeks, I guess, if you include the wearing time. But in the end, the writing takes a few hours on average, I would
Yeah.
say.
On a daily basis, you are used to handle watches,
Yes,
and you mentioned it earlier that you own some Omegas that
yes,
you personally love, I would
yeah,
say.
yeah.
And I would like you to talk about your collection, and
Okay.
you can pick maybe your favorite watch or one or two watches.
Yeah,
And could you please explain us what you see when you look at them?
that's a good question. First time I get that question, to be honest, in that way. It goes a long way back. So the Omega brand is like family related. So my
Mm.
great grandfather, my grandfather, my father all had Omega Constellation watches, and so did I, and I still have them. So the brand Omega was already known to me, and my father once said, "Oh, Omega was the brand that put a watch on the moon, yada yada yada." But I was a small boy. I was 10 or 11 years old, so that didn't mean much to me. Basically, it didn't. Yeah, that it was in the 80s, so it didn't ring a bell with me. And but then I got into watches, and I got that Constellation when I was, I think, 21. And then I started to read more about watches and really get into the topic. And then very quickly, I came across the Speedmaster, because if you grew up with Omega surrounding you, it's this, the first brand that you really look into, right? Because you know it, you've heard about it, so it's the
Mm.
first thing that you get a catalog of. So I got those catalogs back in the day, and the Speedmaster really struck a chord with me, because not so much about the moon landing story at first, but just about I'm not wearing one. I'm wearing a Blancpain, but I have one here. But just about the design of the Moonwatch. It's such a legible and readable chronograph, um, which is not always the case with a lot of chronographs. Now it is a little bit more, because mechanical watches have been hugely in demand, and there's a increase of brands and models and so on since the 2000s. But in those mid to late 90s, there was not that much available, and basically it was the Moonwatch or the IWC Flieger chronograph, the pilot's watch,
Okay.
because those two watches for me were super readable and legible, and had like an iconic design, very timeless. Perhaps that's a better word. And in the end, I chose for the Speedmaster, because that just I had a better click with the Speedmaster rather than with the IWC Pilot's watch. And it's the handwound movement. It's the how the subdials are recessed. The external bezel, the shape of the case was so all elements basically of that watch are something that I truly like. There's nothing about the Moonwatch that I don't like, to be honest. And I think
Yeah,
that's
it's more about the product itself than the
yeah.
story we are telling
Yeah,
about.
so for me, it was very much about the product itself, and the link with Omega was more on a brand level than on the Moon story level. Because the link
Mm.
for me with Omega is that this family relationship, and not so much the moon story. And all that came later when I started to read about this watch. I went online. You had time zone and what you seek, and yet a guy like Chuck Maddox writing about the moon watches. And only then I got more involved into the whole story about the moon landing and the astronauts wearing this watch. And I think that does add an important factor to this watch, because if it's only product, there are many good watches out there. I think often it's the stories that set a watch apart.
Mm.
But for me, in this case, the Moonwatch as such is also like a great watch, great product. So yeah, to answer your question, I collect those. So I started with a vintage one. I bought my first one in '99, October
Do you
1st.
still have?
Yeah, I still have it.
Okay.
It's a caliber 321, and the funny story is that um, at the time I didn't care that much about which one. I just want to have the Moonwatch.
Okay.
So I was looking at a caliber 861 and a caliber 321, but the 861 was at the time was a more modern watch, and I was looking at the pre-owned ones. I was a student, so I had limited budget, and I picked the 321 mainly because it was also cheaper back then. It's unthinkable of today, but the 321 was a few hundred guilders, the currency we had back in the day. It was cheaper than the more modern one, so I picked that one. And in hindsight, it was a good choice, value wise, but also I think the design of the earlier ones. So this one is late 60s. It was a bit more interesting with the step dial and the applied logo and so on, the dot over 90 bezel, those kind of details. But those kind of details only started to matter much later on. When I started collecting Speedmasters, there were very few people who cared so much about these details. If the
Mm.
hands were original or replaced during service and so on, it was, to be very honest, it was a little bit more fun, because people were not that nitpicky.
Okay.
And now I get it. You want to have something that's as original as possible. So I also do get it. But at that time, it didn't matter that much, and it also reflected in the prices. The prices were very friendly. You could buy a few of them. You could find one for like €1,000, early 2000s on eBay, for example. And that
Mm.
changed, and it changed. The quality went up of the watches, I'm pretty sure, but also the prices, of course, went up, as we all know.
Yeah.
Um, and to answer your question about my favorite watches within the collection, I think, well, aside from the Speedy Tuesday models that we did together with Omega, because
Yeah,
they
you will
just,
have to speak more about it later.
yeah, so that's something that is close to the heart. But I think the Moonshine Gold one, the Apollo 11 from 2019, that they did for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, it's such a truthful re-edition of the original gold watch that was presented to astronauts and president and vice president of the US. And in my opinion, it's even a better version than the original. So that one is really something special to me, and I wear it a lot. I don't baby it, so to speak. So I really wear it all the time. Then I received one from my wife and daughter for my first Father's Day, which is a Speedmaster 57 replica or relaunch, as they call it now these days. It's a version they did between 97 and 2003, more or less. And it was one of the first re-editions where they made something based on the broad arrow from 57. And it's a
Okay.
wonderful watch, and yeah, I have an emotional bond with it because I received it from my wife and daughter. And then last but not least, I think, yeah, my first one, the Caliber 321. I mean, that's the one that will never leave the collection. It's not in the best condition because I was a student, so it was always on my wrist, so I banged it
Yeah.
around and so on. But yeah, it was just my daily watch at some point, and yeah, I take care of it a little bit better now. But I still wear it occasionally. But that's yeah, those are, I think, my three picks. But my picks can be different in a year from now, so I move around a little bit.
Let's speak about Omega. You had the chance, as we can say, to do a collaboration with them.
Yeah,
So, due to your work, due to what you created at Fratello, you've been able to create a limited edition with one of the big name
yeah,
in the industry, which is Omega.
yeah,
Could you please tell us a bit more about it and
yeah.
how it started, etc.?
Well, what started with the Speedy Tuesday thing or phenomenon, meanwhile, is that I started that in 2012. And I started to do articles on Speedmasters every Tuesday, and then the hashtag catched on Instagram and also on Facebook. There's a group that is very active on Speedmasters called Speedy Tuesday. So it's really a community thing. So for me, it was not so much about watches or making a limited edition, but about finding like-minded people collecting the same watch or have shared a passion for that same watch. In this case, the Speedmaster. And in 2016, I met the current president of the company, Reinald Aschliman, and we discussed it, and we said, "Oh, can we do something together?" Because yeah, Speedy Tuesdays will turn 5 years in
Mhm.
2017. And he said, "Yeah, do you have something in mind?" I said, "Yeah, I would love to do a watch. I don't know if it's possible, but I would love to do a watch, like from the community for the community." And he said, "Yeah, why not? Let's give it a shot and let's come up with some designs." And so we really put effort into it, and it was a team effort from our side at Fratello, and there was a small dedicated team at Omega, and only very few people knew about it. So we came with the first Speedmaster Speedy Tuesday, which was based on a watch that actually in 2012, on the first year of Speedy Tuesday, we got one in. It was a watch from an astronaut, and it had a radial dial. And it was a watch shipped from Omega to NASA in '78. And that project internally was called Alaska 3.
Okay.
So our watch we call a tribute to Alaska 3. So it had the radial dials, and we added the light subdial. So it's a reverse Panda watch. Omega came with some ideas surrounding the full brushed case and so on. So it was really a nice little project going on that turned into something really big. It was the first time that Omega offered something online
Yeah.
worldwide. So that was a first, and it was the first watch I think they did together with a media title and
Yeah.
and with a yeah collectors community more or less. It was not a watch like designed by commission by community or by yeah by how do you say by a committee. So it
Yeah.
was really just a few people from Fratello and a few people from Omega that came up with this watch. It was also very scary because outside of our little bubble, we didn't know if the watch would catch on, if people would warm up to the design and so on. So it was interesting to see how quick it went when it was released in January 2017, that it was sold out in just a few hours.
And
And
how
it was
many pieces have been sold?
2012 pieces because that was
It's
like the
quite nice.
founding year of Speedy Tuesday. So it was also not a small run, right? It's
Yeah.
quite an amount of watches, and I was a little bit nervous because I thought, yeah, what if they only sell 100 or 200 or nothing? You don't know. But yeah, it went so quick, and also afterwards, some people said, yeah, I missed out, and I'm really bummed. And even some friends later on, they bought one on the secondary market because they really wanted to have that watch. So that was a cool thing. And then the year after, we did another one, and that was like the Ultraman that paid tribute to those Speedmaster Ultraman watches that Omega made in the late '60s. And also a very cool project, very much involved from A to Z.
Yeah.
And that one even sold out quicker because I also think it was a themed watch, and I think a theme always, like the Snoopies, they also, I think they are a bit more playing with the imagination of people. So no, wonderful projects, and we have no plans at the moment for doing a third one. We just want to cherish the community, and I think from next year on we will catch up with the events again, Speedy Tuesday events for the
Okay.
community. We didn't do that much this year. Last year we went to Japan, but those events are just the best thing ever because there you really meet with the people behind the Instagram names, and where you can talk about Speedmasters. You can get really nerdy about some Speedmasters, and some
That's
people
what you
just,
love.
yeah, and they just bring the craziest watches to the table, and I think that's so cool. And you rarely get these opportunities to see some really like rare watches on the table, but also people who have just one Speedmaster, like a fresh one, a modern one like this, and they're always more than welcome with them because I think that keeps it fresh. Um, to mix very seasoned collectors with people who are just starting out to collect Speedmasters and perhaps inspire them. Um, so it's a very open community, I would say.
Due to Fratello, you are able to experience quite very nice things. The collaboration with Omega is one of them. Which one would you say that it was maybe the best experience you've been able to live due to Fratello?
I think one of the nicest things I've experienced was several trips to Japan, a country I would not have visited otherwise. So I think that soon. But I've been there for Grand Seiko, but also for our own Speedy Tuesday events twice, and it's such an amazing country. And I only saw a very small part of it, but it was very interesting to visit. And we traveled around a little bit with Grand Seiko at the time in 2015, and I was there in 2017 as well. It's such an impressive country, so that was really cool to see. Another one was, well, a few actually. It's not so much the place or the venue or the product. It was meeting with some of the original Apollo astronauts.
Okay.
So during the Speedy Tuesday event, we had Apollo astronaut Charlie Duke talking to all the guests, and I've met with Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan and Jim Lovell from Apollo 13. It's so cool to hear the stories from these guys. It's just amazing. Yeah, who lived it, and that's so amazing. And I feel so fortunate to have been in that position. And of course, these guys getting much older, and some passed away meanwhile. And so it's very time-wise, it's very fortunate that I could meet them. Yeah. So I think it's more about meeting these people than seeing a certain place or a building or a mountain or whatsoever. It's these stories that I think that are incredibly interesting.
Maybe that's the best sentence that will allow me to conclude that, guys, if you want to understand what Fratello is and what you are doing, just remember that sentence.